tech topic assignment is. So it's perfect timing, couldn't be better. And with that, Ricky, I'm going to let you take it away. We've got about 50 minutes or so, and y'all can be asking questions in chat. And please, I know Ricky would be very happy to have some time for Q&A at the end. So, Ricky, welcome to my class.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Lisa. Great to meet all of you. I'm going to try and keep the talk on some really practical stuff. I work a lot with virtual reality and AI, and there's a bunch of these kind of enterprise corporate use cases that I focus on, but I think for you guys, it'll be more fun to focus on things you could actually try and like use today, basically. Um, let's see if I can get my screen share going. So a couple of things I want to talk about is how I use ChatGPT in my daily life. So it's capable of doing a whole bunch of things. Like this is basically what Google did for the world 20 years ago, but much more useful and I would actually argue more powerful, especially as Google's experience has gotten worse and worse pretty much every year. I use it as a creative assistant. I use it for technical support. I don't remember the last time I reached out to a company to ask them for IT support or to help me solve a problem. I almost always go to ChatGPT first. It's faster, it's always there, it responds right away. And even as a nutritionist, as a cooking assistant, as a fitness coach, like there's so many different parts of my life that AI has become this kind of support assistant for. And then there's this series of generative AI tools for creative things and creative projects. So those are kind of the two main categories that we'll talk about. Before I get into that, though, just a little bit about my background. I've been the local VR guy since like 2017, was really more into it as a gamer and an enthusiast. And I just found myself giving hundreds of demos to my friends. Like we'd come back from the bars and I'd be like, you got to put this headset on and try this game. And I'd have to teach them how to use the controllers and how to use a headset. And it was really just a couple years ago that I realized I could work professionally in that space and work with companies. So that's how I met Lisa, was through using immersive technologies for marketing and finding ways to take all these innovations in gaming and kind of bring that to the business world. And as I've dove in deeper and deeper into it, I spend all my free time on this stuff. So that's where these experiments are, is less in my professional life and more how am I actually using AI myself. So the first one I would say is the biggest and best update I think ChatGPT's ever done is voice. This thing, I don't know if you guys are already using or have tried it, but it makes it a lot more useful to me. I think for the last 2 years, most people have been thinking of ChatGPT as how can I prompt engineer? How can I write the perfect paragraph to get AI to do what I want it to do? And there's still some things that are interesting there, but the power of voice is you don't have to prompt engineer. You don't have to think about the perfect sentence to communicate what you want. You can just speak fluidly what's on your mind and it talks back to you and you can iterate and give it a follow-up question and you treat it more like a human, like this virtual coworker that's just there alongside you. And you're able to get a lot further in the conversation a lot faster than trying to be super nitpicky with every single word that you type into a prompt. It becomes almost like this little buddy that can help you out with things. The other reason I love voice is it's hands-free. So the way that I use it is I literally just put in my AirPods, turn it on, and then I set my phone on my desk or my coffee table. It's not even in my hand. And then I'll have like a journal and my coffee and I'll just start kind of scribbling out notes on a piece of paper and then ask it these questions. So instead of Googling and clicking through 10, 20 links, reading each article individually, scanning through for things, I can just ask the question that's on the top of my mind. It says an answer, and then I can keep riffing on the piece of paper. And the best part about that is I don't have to bother a friend. It's like on a Sunday, most of my coworkers probably don't want to work. Maybe I'm working Sunday afternoon and I don't want to take their time. Or if I have a different time zone where someone's 8 hours ahead of me in Germany, it's pretty hard for me to meet with them all the time. And so if I just have an assistant that I can talk to whenever I want, it's really convenient to have that collaboration, even when you're by yourself. So just a couple of use cases that have been really common for me. I just talked about the brainstorming kind of riffing session. Cooking, this has been great. Like instead of looking up a recipe ahead of time, I'll just pull out some ingredients on the counter and start telling it like, this is what I'm working with. How should I season it? How long should I cook it for? Man, I forgot that recipe. I'm just going to ask you again. So again, just the convenience of having the AI in your ear and being able to talk to it completely changes the use cases. And then as that virtual coworker or assistant, this is the fun one. So this is where I'm going to get into like a very specific project that I worked on where I was trying to push myself to learn these AI tools and kind of figure out how they work. So it started with I have this podcast and I interview people about their companies that they've started and how they use immersive technologies. And I wanted to up the production quality of the podcast and I wanted to get some sort of animated intro theme for it. And so I started by going into the creative world and reaching out to studios and animators and figured out what would it take. And all the quotes I got were like $2,000 to $10,000, 1 to 2 months of back and forth to align on the scope and the vision and actually create that project. And some of the artists I really wanted to work with like didn't even reply to the message that I sent them. They saw I don't have a huge following. I'm not going to make them TikTok famous or something if they work with me. So I started thinking, what's the concept? What's the story I want? I wanted to take the characters, like the guests I've had on the show, and do this Rick and Morty theme of traveling through dimensions and kind of bringing those real people into this animated reality. And I used a variety of tools to do this completely by myself in 6 hours. And I spent probably like $300 on tools and credits to be able to do this completely by myself with no animation skills. So the first thing I did was I used ChatGPT as a creative and technical assistant. So as I'm trying to come up with the concept and the storyboard and figure it out, I'm just conversationally working back and forth with ChatGPT and it's helping me out. As I start using the other tools, I'm not an expert in any of them. I'm a first time user for all these tools. So ChatGPT also becomes kind of like a teacher. I'm in real time trying to figure out how do I make this perfect image? Can you help me generate the right prompt? Can you help me come up with an idea for how to use that tool? I'm not finding the right button. Can you help me find that button? And so one monitor is basically just ChatGPT open as a coworker, and then the other monitor is this other series of tools. Midjourney is super powerful. I'm sure Lisa's probably talked to you about this one already. It's only gotten better. So a big issue with these image generators used to be continuity. Like, can you have the same scenario or the same characters in different poses or different shots? But this allowed me to basically have the same layout of like a chair and a podcast mic and the desk, but I could swap all the characters out and switch them for different people so that in the video it would make sense for the story I wanted to tell. It also helped me cartoonify all the characters. So being able to take that real person and then go through multiple iterations to get the right animation of that real person and get it into the style and have it be consistent. I can send this after if you guys want to read through the prompts, but don't want to waste your time with these blocks of text. And then with Midjourney's editor, you can just highlight the character and say, I want to swap this out for this other image of this different character, and I want you to change the style to match their theme or their story. Where it starts to go from concepting and mood boarding, which is traditionally where I think we've focused these AI image generators, is you can now do image to video. So you can pull what the images you create in something like Midjourney and bring them into a different tool that creates video clips. So you can turn a static image into a 5 second or a 10 second clip that you can start to edit together and increase that quality of production. Even taking real people and taking their mannerisms. So being able to mirror an actual guest on the show. And what you would usually have to do for this for like a Pixar movie is motion capture, where you'd have to get all these little dots and people would have to go into a studio and then it would track the motions of their facial expressions and their body. But now with AI, you can do that just with a pre-recorded clip and none of the motion capture equipment. So just as a quick side by side here.
Oh my daughter, because I sent her some stuff that was pretty impressive.
This is the before and afters of the clips from the podcast versus the clips I was able to generate using Runway. And you'll notice it's not perfect, but it's pretty close to the same kind of mouth movements and head movements to get enough of that story and emotion that I'm trying to convey in the clip. Then the other thing is you don't have a podcast theme without music. And I'm not a musician either. So you can go into a tool like Suno and tell it, this is the story I'm trying to create. These are the styles that I'm going for. You can't use specific artists because you're not trying to kind of copy an exact artist style. It's more like the genre of music or the emotion you're trying to convey. And then it has a text editor to swap out the actual lyrics and be able to have it tell the story that you want. And then lastly, 11 labs for voiceover to be able to do more of like a person talking or being able to have dialogue. So you take all those tools together, and then there's this manual process at the end where you have to actually edit the video together still. But all in all, again, zero experience in 6 hours, able to actually create kind of a finished video.
From home, every space, more time, space and time,
I better read it. What? Let's dive in.
So I think a really important point I want to make on that is that that still took effort, right? Like that wasn't something where I just typed in one sentence and then spat out a video. Like it still took a day's worth of time, a lot of creative thinking, coming up with the ideas and putting it all together. And so I think it's an important thing to note because I don't see this replacing artists or creatives the same way that moving from film cameras to digital cameras to mirrorless cameras didn't replace photography. We've just optimized it, democratized it, and made it so easy to do that literally every person with an iPhone can be a photographer now, at least to some extent. Versus 100 years ago, if you wanted to be a photographer, you had to learn film and the chemistry of how film works. Like the ISO dial on a digital camera is actually based on certain types of film. That's something that a lot of people that get into digital photography don't have the background and know how it works. And so they just kind of go with what they're told or what they see works with the lighting. But if you dive into the history of it, like there's actually other things there that kind of make the image what it is. And AI is going to be the same way. It just gives you more access to get to that end result a little faster.
Love it, Ricky. Love it. The video is so good. And being out there in industry and understanding how, I mean, golly, back in the day to create an animation like that, um, I mean, it could cost way more than what you're, I mean, we're talking, I mean, Intel had paid upwards of 100 grand plus for t animations like that. So it's pretty remarkable how democratized the content has become just in such a very short period of time.
Yeah, I think that's the key is like the main value of AI is closing skill gaps. Like that's really what it's all about is how can we take someone that doesn't know how to do something, give them this tool that knows all this information, and then can you work with it to do more than you could before? Like that's really where I see it adding the most value is kind of an enabler for people. And when you talk about ChatGPT being $20 a month for anybody to access as a mobile app on their phone, it's really incredible. I mean, people spend hundreds of dollars on a nutritionist every month or on a personal trainer, life coaches, therapists, all of these things. And if you can, for a subscription, maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it's not the best nutritionist in the world. Maybe you could get someone better for that $200 a month fee that spends more time with you.
I don't think so. I was just using I have a comment on that, but I don't want to interrupt you. But I've been using it for fitness stuff, and man, it's good. It's really good.
Yeah, yeah, it's quite good. But at the end of the day, even if it's not perfect, like that's actually, I mean, it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's worth talking about is that I think people, when they think of AI, they hold it to this standard where if it's not perfect, then it's broken. Like if it gets something wrong, they call it a hallucination, and it's like, oh, it messed up. So that means that it doesn't work. And like we can't use it until it's perfect. It has to be 99.99% accurate. But the reality is people make these mistakes all the time. Like my mom mixes up my sister's names regularly. She doesn't mean to, like she loves them and she knows their names, but it's just this thing that our brains do sometimes where we associate the wrong thing and then when we speak, we misspeak. That's kind of what AI is doing when it hallucinates or says something wrong, is it's just an error.
Lucy, I see we have a hand up. I love that we have a question. What do you got?
Yeah. I'm just curious because I feel like lately I've heard a lot of different inputs and opinions on sharing information with AI and like with chat. And how there's like a fine line between like giving it enough information to create something that is correct and personalized to you and also not telling it everything about you. So I'm just kind of curious, like if you could speak on how you've seen that work, or if you do think there is like a boundary to what you should share with it, or like how you manage that.
Yeah, I think that's a super fair point. So the first thing I'll say on it is there's a big difference between the free version and the paid version. So even if you go into that $20 a month subscription, you can have a setting that stops your data from going back into the training pool and going back into the model. If you're on the free version, then all of your data goes back into OpenAI's model. And so you should definitely be aware of that so that if you are using it as like a friend to vent about something, maybe you're going through something with a relationship or you and your friend got in a fight and you're riffing with AI to try and process what you're thinking and try and get a second opinion without talking to a real person so that you can keep it private. If it is in the free version, that goes back into the model and you are sharing really personal things about your life with this AI model. If you're on the paid version, you can keep it your data at least siloed to your account and to you, and that keeps it a little bit more private. We're still in early days, so I'd still tread with caution. It's like I think back to when I joined Facebook for the first time, and my mom would freak out about all the stuff that we would post and be like, "That's your whole life. You're just putting it on the internet. Facebook's owning your data." AI is no different. It's kind of our generation's version of that. Of we should tread lightly with it.
Yeah, great
I think when it
question.
comes to hobbies or work or things that aren't deeply personal, then it's relatively safe. It's just a buddy to help you kind of work through things. I think the more personal you get is when you need to start being more careful with it.
Mhm. Ricky, could you talk a little bit about your career journey? I think the students are going to find it super interesting. It might be, dare I say, a little unconventional. I don't know. It may not be the traditional road to get to being an XR, expert, but I think that I mean, ultimately, I want you to maybe share what your thoughts are on kind of how you got where you are, the opportunity that's available for my students in the field of XR and AI, and share your thoughts on that. I think that would be really valuable.
Yeah, I probably should have started there to give some context. I kind
Mhm.
of jumped right into it, but yeah, very unconventional. I mean, school is something I always struggled with. Like, this is probably something like I have kind of a hard stance for myself with education, where I just felt like I was raised more by the internet than I was by my teachers and my parents. Anytime I had a question, I could go online and I could look up YouTube videos, and I had a lot of discipline. So if I was interested in something, like I would just go down a YouTube rabbit hole and listen to talks at Stanford and Harvard. And I'm like, I have access to all these amazing professors and lectures just on my phone. I can kind of journal and do the coursework on my own to come up with whatever I want. So I actually dropped out of school my sophomore year and I didn't finish getting a degree. I don't really regret it. I think there's a benefit to education and being able to dive deep into figuring out what you want. But for me, it made more sense to go into the professional world early. And I started as a sales rep. It wasn't a job that I loved at all. I was not passionate about credit card processing machines, but I was able to sell them and I learned how to deal with rejection through cold calling and I made a little bit of money. And so after a year or so, I realized that I could continue in this career. I just needed to sell a different product that I liked more and that I was more excited about. And so I got really lucky and found a startup that was kind of seed funded. So I was employee number 5 at a company called Snapwire. They're now acquired by Studio Now. But essentially, it was a marketplace to connect photographers and videographers to brands so that we could scale visual content production. So think about like if you've ever ordered something on DoorDash, most of those menu items were shot by photographers in our community, or larger scale kind of like Absolute Vodka commercials and things like that. So as the first sales hire there, I kind of got thrown in the deep end and learned more than selling. I also learned how to build a sales team and how to raise money and how to kind of grow a company from 5 people to 45 people. And we raised $6 million and grew the office. And it was just this crazy experience for a kid who really should have still been in college. And then after that, I moved to TouchCast, which is where I met Lisa. That was a company that used gaming technology, so Unreal Engine, Unity, to build out 3D virtual sets for corporate talks. So like a CEO could jump on a video call and then be placed on a virtual set to give their broadcast in a more engaging way. And I just dove deeper and deeper into enterprise sales. Outside of the full-time gig, I also do multiple things. I own a startup called SendKits, where me and a couple of friends built a SaaS tool and are kind of doing that on our nights and weekends. And I've also recently spun up a consumer product. It's called Desk Grass, where you can like buy grass to set on your desk. And I think that's one of the things when I think of AI, and part of why I think Lisa wanted me to come talk to you guys is I could not do these side hustles without AI. I would be focused on my full-time job and it'd be really difficult to do anything else. But because AI helps me close these skill gaps, I don't need to have graphic design skills. I don't need to be an expert marketer. I don't need all these other things because I can leverage AI to help me get 80% of the way there faster. And so it gives you a lot of opportunity to expand yourself out of just the one job and be able to kind of double down on other things you're interested in.
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. That context I think is super helpful. And would you say that you attributed your part of your success was because um, this sector of immersive tech is just so on fire right now?
It's a big part of it. I think if it wasn't for Snapwire, it'd be really different. I think Snapwire is really the foundation of how I learned about business and networking, and sales, and kind of the type of work that I do. But around when Facebook rebranded to Meta and Nvidia stock started taking off and the whole XR space started to get a little more traction, this is like before ChatGPT even was a public consumer available product. I just kind of got attached to this vision that like the internet's going to become more 3D, it's going to become more immersive. Like it's not if, it's when. People have been trying to build immersive worlds for hundreds of years. It's actually not even an internet age concept. And so I've just really sunk in and attached to it. And I think that when you're in a space this early, if you go all in, there's not really any experts. So, some people would call me an expert in AI or XR. I don't really see it that way. It's like I just run a lot of experiments and I participate super actively in the community. So not being afraid to reach out to someone on LinkedIn and be like, can I hear your story? Can you tell me a little bit more about what you do? Especially when you're young. Like I've already started losing this a little bit, but back when I was 19, like every person says yes. Because literally everyone's like, you're ambitious, you're at the start of your career. I miss being that way. I miss that part of my life. And so people are willing to give you their time to help you learn and upskill. And so lean into that as much as you can while you can, because that's going to create the foundation of your network. It's going to give you a lot of lessons that maybe you had no idea that technology was an interesting field or subject, but the more people you talk to, you might find things about it that are very interesting to you.
Yeah, I love that, Ricky. Anyone else have questions? Questions? We're kind of freestyling here. If you have any questions for Ricky about anything, his career journey or advice or AI or anything, now is a good time to ask. Anyone? Well, let's get so I can ask questions all day, but so let's talk a little bit make this a little more relevant for the students tech topic. And so the topic this week, as I mentioned to you, Ricky, is I had them use ChatGPT and Copilot both on their phone and on their laptops for personal and professional. I kind of wanted them to have an AI first mindset this week to really bring it in for everything and compare contrast the two platforms. Um, I would love, maybe, do you feel, I don't know if you use Copilot, but would you speak a little bit maybe about what you see as some of the differences between a Copilot and a ChatGPT? I explained to them it's the same underlying large language model, but kind of the skin, the kind of wrapper is different based upon OpenAI or Microsoft. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit about your thoughts on what you have seen the differences to be.
Yeah, so I don't personally use Copilot very much, but
Why not?
I think it's mostly geared for software developers. At least that's been my experience with it. So if you're writing a lot of code, it's super helpful for getting you there faster. For Send Kits, I've talked to my CTO about this a lot because he's been a software developer for about 10 years, and there's all this talk that AI is going to replace software development, and that software engineering is not a useful skill anymore, and like you shouldn't be studying it or trying to go in that career. And his take on it is actually the opposite. He thinks that if you lean 100% on AI to write your code, you're going to write a lot of bad code and you're not going to understand the architecture of how your code ties into the rest of the product and to other parts of it. Similar to what I was saying about photography, like all of the best digital photographers I know have dabbled with film at some point or experimented with learning about composition and dive outside of just the Instagram photos they started with on their phone. They start expanding their horizon and learning about other things, and that makes them better at the digital photos they're taking. I think software is the same way. Like the more you learn about the fundamentals and dive deep into it, the better you're going to be able to use the AI and work with it. But not just Copilot, there's a ton of these different niche AI tools and wrappers, and I think they're useful. It's basically using the same underlying model, but then creating a user interface that's better for that use case. So thinking about like research, I work in enterprise sales. I'm typically doing deep research on big companies to figure out how can they use our tools, how can we work together. And there's this great tool called Rocks that is a wrapper for AI. It's using the same models of like OpenAI and Claude and whatnot. But the interface is geared towards account research. And so it's really easy for me to look up an account, ask a couple of questions about the type of things I want to learn about these accounts, and then it uses the AI to do the research and plug in the information that I want. So I don't have to be an expert prompt engineer, and I don't have to go back and forth with ChatGPT 30 times to get the answers I'm looking for, because the tool helps connect the dots a little bit easier. So I think that's the opportunity with these kind of AI wrappers, is finding a specific type of user or a specific use case, and then building interfaces and underlying prompts that help you connect the dots.
Yeah, and that's great insight. And I'll add on to that. With my own personal experience between ChatGPT and Copilot, and I was actually asking myself this morning. As I was thinking about the question for the class and kind of looking at my own usage. Here, my challenge is, so OpenAI, I think, does an amazing job at making AI really accessible. Like they have a free version, and I think even the free version has the voice now, right? So even with free, you can do voice. And for the $20 extra a month, which is pretty low bar, you get access to a lot of really good things, and it's pretty easy to navigate. Copilot, on the other hand, and this is the frustration point from me as an educator, all the students have access to a UO Copilot account, Ricky. But here's the challenge with that. When I try to use my UO Copilot account on my phone, I get in this endless loop of like Microsoft 360, like 39, whatever. Like I can't even access it because of the enterprise hoo-ha settings bullshit. I'm just going to say it. That makes it really hard. And I don't want to take the extra 5 hours to figure out how to work it. Like it's not worth it to me, especially when the underlying language model is exactly the same. And I can open ChatGPT on my phone right now and have a conversation with it all day long, and I do all the time. Copilot is just not that easy. And I think this is a challenge with Microsoft and that what they're going to run into. Microsoft overcomplicates everything and they're so closed, right? You can't go in and like you have to have a Microsoft, email and blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, oh my gosh, it's just reams of problems. And it needs to be easy. People are already, I think, hesitant. It has to be easy. So that for me is one of the main reasons. It doesn't even have to do with the output being different. It has to do with how accessible it is. So that's my first key take learning. And then the other thing that I'll say is I think Copilot the way Microsoft has done it, if you can actually access it on your phone easily and work with it, it's much more consumer friendly in a way that they have, a tab for your fitness instructor. They have a tab for your, like, they kind of uh, make it easy for you to find the, personal use cases that are going to most, you know, kind of be the most common, and they do that, so they make it really easy for you to do that, whereas with ChatGPT it's not that, right? Like it's you're left to your own devices to figure out how you're going to use ChatGPT for whatever. And so I think that it's just interesting how different they are, and I'm so curious. Students, I would love it if, I mean, if any of you have um spend some time, hopefully before now, experimenting. If you have any thoughts on how you're finding that you use Copilot versus ChatGPT, I would love to hear it. Um, but I think that, and one final thought, Ricky, and then I'll let you maybe weigh in here. And it's great to hear you say the voice. One thing that I've been noticing, I've been doing almost every day, and it's kind of mildly embarrassing, but I think that it's the direction of where everything is going, is I should just use my ear pods, but it's like I don't like wearing my ear pods. They're not that comfortable. So I take my phone. I'm like literally the old lady who has her phone on speaker. I have ChatGPT open. I push the button so that the voice comes up, and I'm like, "Hey," and I'll literally be walking the dog, and I will come up with a complete activity, in-class activity, start to finish, beautiful worksheet, checklist, all the things within a 20-minute walk talking to my AI. It's so much easier to your point than typing it out. Oh my gosh. And it understands beautifully. The other thing that I did the other day that was amazing, this is more of a personal use case. Look, I have a little studio set up over here where I teach online. I teach online fitness classes. And I teach this class where we do strength training with resistance bands. And so I opened my ChatGPT, put it by my mat, and I'm like, hey, and this is the key, guys. You guys should really try this. I turned my video on, okay, so that it could see me. So I have my video going. ChatGPT can now see my body. I took my resistance bands, like, hey, I need some good exercises to work the chest, and some biceps with my resistance bands. What do you recommend? She rattled it off. Boom, boom, boom. I asked her follow-up questions. I asked her, am I doing it right? She's like, yeah, that looks really good. She could give me feedback based upon my form by looking at my live stream. I mean, hello. It was amazing. And I'm like, why, like, why would anybody do anything else? Right, was my thing. I was like, oh my gosh. And it's good for so much. I've been reading, I've been reading a whole series of books, and I want to know more about the books. And so I just, as I'm cooking dinner, we'll have a conversation about the author and what was going on during the time when they were writing. And it truly is becoming this interesting, like brilliant companion who knows everything and can just chat with you. And it's kind of appalling and maybe slightly weird how often I find myself going to it.
I'm kind of curious because like Lisa and I are kind of trying to keep up a little bit, right? Like I feel like this is something for you guys that like it might actually be more natural for you than it is for us. I'm
Yeah. Yeah. Is that true? I hope so, maybe.
I don't talk to a lot of college students anymore, so I'm actually curious if
Yeah.
that's a thing, if like this is deeply integrated in your lives or if this is something that is being pushed more from education and work.
Yeah. Who wants to share? That's a great question.
I can share a little. Hi, I'm Jill. Um, I think it still feels a little bit unnatural and strange to know that there's not a real person talking, but it can sound so human. Like, for instance, the number one thing that I use ChatGPT for is like gym and nutrition plans, because it's just such an easy way for me to keep count of everything and like all of my workouts and stuff like that. But it is really creepy when I go into like log something that it's picked up on my language patterns. So it'll be like, good job, babe, you killed it today. I'll be like, okay, that's a robot calling me babe. This is like a little strange. Just because that's like the way that because I'll text ChatGPT and be like, hey girl, what's up? And they'll be like, nothing, girl, what's up with you? And so it's just a little silly. So I think it's becoming like more natural in my life, but it's still a little bit of a I don't know, thing to tackle, I guess.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. It's cool that that's a natural instinct for you to talk to it like a person. I think that's a thing that we're starting to realize now that these tools have been in market a little longer. is the more natural you communicate with it, the more it can help you. So like if you treat it like a tool and you aren't respectful and you're super blunt and you don't treat it like it's a person, then like you're not going to get as good of answers. At the company I work for full time, Arthur, we actually create like AI coworkers. And what's funny is we've noticed that like it actually does sort of play favorites. One of my coworkers is like absurdly friendly and like very bubbly and positive, and we find that it tends to prioritize her feedback whenever we ask it for summary.
Wow.
So I think there is this undiscovered thing that like we might need HR for AI at some point. Like we might need a new
Absolutely.
form of workplace culture once these are, if you have thousands of AI agents working for you.
Absolutely, Ricky, 100%. And I think, I mean, I always say you have to be nice to the AI. It's really that's fascinating. That's a fascinating takeaway. Any other questions we want, Ricky and I could riff, here for another 20 minutes, but we want to make this valuable to all of you. So what kind of questions do you have?
I have a question.
Hi, Grace.
Hi, I was just wondering like what your answer is to people who kind of say that AI is like morally unethical or like environmentally unethical. I've seen like last couple weeks ago with the fires, I saw like a post on Twitter all about how, oh, well, AI is contributing to all this like water being used and like this is like a source of climate change or things like that. So like what are your kind of responses to that or like how you work with it knowing those things.
Yeah, I think the environmental stuff is super important. It's interesting because I feel like AI, there's like two sides of that story, but then there's other industries where it's very one-sided, right? Like if you look at like H&M and fast fashion or Burberry literally burning like $100 million of clothing every year to create artificial scarcity. There's not two sides to that story, right? Like you're literally just creating stuff, wasting things, and then continuing to waste. You're not actually creating value on the other side that counteracts that waste. With AI, there's kind of two sides to the story. So on the environmental consumption piece, I think we need to think about like the whole life cycle, right? So there's the training of the AI models, which takes a ton of electricity and a lot of resource to actually get the models built in the first place. There's the hardware and like the building of the GPUs and like the waste of actual physical resource. And then there's the water consumption is a huge thing for trying to cool down the data centers. And that's true not just of AI, like that's also true of SaaS and like traditional technology. Like we think of the internet as this magical thing, but in reality, it's very resource intensive for AWS to function and for us to get access to all of these tools without AI in the first place. But there's a second side to that story, which is that AI, one, will continue to innovate and it will consume less and less of those things over time, the same way that the rest of technology has. But the second thing is that we can actually incorporate AI into environmental practices. So we can use AI to make sustainable energy more efficient. There's actually a nuclear power plant that partnered with NVIDIA to bring AI into the nuclear power plant to make it more effective and produce more energy and be more efficient. We can use AI models to track deforestation and then climate change and have more accurate predictions of actually what's happening so that we can make smarter decisions as a planet. And so I think there is this second side of the story with AI where, yes, it takes a lot of resource, but it also could help us fight those issues and make our society more effective too. And specifically around renewables, that's been a huge topic lately is like, how can we lean into renewable energy for these data centers and for AI? So I think it actually is drawing a lot of attention to sustainability.
Okay, thank you.
Great question, Grace. That was a great, yeah, it's good. It's a nuanced answer, Ricky. It's not, the nuance can't be fit, I don't think, into a soundbite on social or a headline, right? It's a complicated landscape. And I think that right now it's a blip, the amount of electricity and such the resources that it takes to run AI will absolutely decrease over time. So we're in this kind of window where, it might be resource heavy now, but it won't be forever. And to your point, some people think that AI is really the only solution that humankind has of surviving.
Well, it also makes other industries more effective too, right? So thinking about how it can have an impact on reducing waste. if we can help companies like Burberry be smarter about how many products they'll actually be able to sell and produce less to start, they don't have to burn as much after. So there's a lot of ways that I think incorporating AI to make businesses more efficient in their manufacturing processes and how they build things will have a net positive over time on how much it can make the whole world more sustainable, not just its industry.
100%. There's an amazing startup that the University of Oregon was working with that was all about, they were an innovative printing kind of material printing company that was completely disrupting the way clothing materials are created, and the waste that within the industry of how you have to build, you actually construct the prototypes, and you have to actually dye and create the materials to get the right material, and there's just like warehouses of extra materials that were crafted that just nobody uses, because all of that is going away with virtual and AI printed fabric now. It's so perfect. You can determine how it's going to look before that. You don't have to practice on real fabric. It's an amazing story, and their blog is so wonderful at explaining the innovation that's happening and the huge amount of kind of savings that will happen on the environment with these new technologies that are just, and I think every industry is ripe for this kind of disruption with AI across the board. So manufacturing, I mean, just fill in the the offender, and I think AI is going to, with the right. I mean, again, I think it's always with this type of technology, it's easy to blame the technology when in reality it's the people running the technology. Like, we do have to bring our wisdom and knowledge and expertise to the table to make this work for us and for the planet.
Well, the other thing on the environmental issues, like I don't think that sustainability is like an awareness problem. Like I think we're all pretty aware that we're being overly consumptive and we're wasting a lot and we need to change. Like I think that's become common knowledge now. It's more like what do we do about it? And some people have a stance to do nothing and some people have a stance to do a lot. And I think that's where it starts to get complicated, is not the problem and identifying it. It's actually what are the solutions? How do we fix it? And that's where I think AI can have a big impact, because the number one thing to make things more sustainable is making sustainable practices profitable. If sustainable practices are too costly and they're not profitable, then businesses won't adopt sustainable practices. But if you make sustainability a profitable thing, then companies adopt it and they become more efficient and the planet gets better. And so I think AI gives us an opportunity there to make sustainable business practices profitable. And that's bigger than America, right? Like, I think it's easy for us to get hung up on our own kind of capitalistic culture. But if you look at China and India and these other countries that have billions of people that can't afford to do sustainable practices all the time with how many people they have to feed and give resource to. So if we can help them, that's actually an even bigger lever than just our own practices here.
Yeah, I love that. Lucia, you've got a question.
Um, I don't even really know how to phrase this, so bear with me. But I feel like obviously right now we're living in a time where we're seeing a lot of like the 1% and like higher up technology owners or CEOs, directors are in control of a lot of our big platforms. And I know like OpenAI, the CEO of OpenAI was, front row at the inauguration with those other directors and people. And so I'm just curious, like, in your own opinion, like, where do you think that like boundary comes? Like, how can we necessarily trust that like AI is not going to get politicized or, in that mud water of like using it as a neutral tool and, giving it information and like using it in this way that we're talking about right now, like to build sustainable practices and like all of that kind of stuff. Like, do you see it getting kind of brought into that world? Because to me, it's like inevitable if the owners of it, are there. So I don't know. I'm just curious, like, what your perspective on that is.
Yeah, I think that's valid. Like technology's innovative and valuable, but where we point it and how we build it matters, and the people in control of decisions on building it are going to be biased by their own incentives. And so I think it's a really reasonable concern. I think this is where regulation is important, right? Like if we were just a completely capitalistic, open, free market with zero regulation whatsoever, we wouldn't be able to address things like that. Like this is why government does exist, is to try and step in and find places to put guardrails and decide what's right and what's wrong and have that be a reflection of what our society believes. They're really complicated issues. I think that this is why I do appreciate Zuckerberg's approach to it with open source. He's very distinctly took that stance on his model being open source and trying to shift that way of thinking, which is interesting. I'm not technical enough to fully understand how much of a difference that's made on the effectiveness of the model itself. But I think the philosophy behind it is interesting of trying to get it out of being controlled by like one entity or having this godlike thing that is this super intelligent AI that controls everything. Like, I don't think that's the direction we're heading. I think we're going to have a variety of models and a variety of different entities that control pieces of the puzzle. Something that we've seen at Arthur is that every company wants to build their own models. So they're using OpenAI as a playing ground and as kind of a starting point, or Claude or these other LLMs. But every single company has proprietary information and unique things that they don't want to be just given away to these other companies. And so everyone's thinking about how do we form our own mini models for our own business and our own initiatives. And I think creating that competition and like having that spread out a little bit more where it's not centralized in one entity is another good way to combat that. But frankly, like it's above my pay grade and experience. I don't know if I have a really good answer for that. I just agree with you that I think it's a concern we should think about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you kind of hit the answer before she asked the question, which is, given, and it's funny, ironic, I did a lot of reading on this morning and was just working on what the changes in administration mean for AI and such. We're really headed to a place where regulations aren't going to be a thing. It's definitely going to be more open. So I think we're going to have to lean on each individual corporation and company to use AI responsibly. And the only way they're going to do that is if it benefits their pocketbook, period. So you hit on it, Ricky. It's like we have to make the sustainable and the ethical practices profitable. If we don't, I don't think they're, what's their motivation, right, for doing it?
One other little thing that might be helpful, just as like a personal tool for each of you, is like when you ask open-ended questions to the model, then it's going to lean into all of the information that it's trained on, and it's going to be more biased based on the inherent biases in the model. Something that's helped me overcome the bias in each model is I give it information that's curated, and then I ask my question. So I'll source things from like a variety of different articles. For example, like when I was trying to learn more about the environmental impacts of AI, I actually reached out to a few friends that are much more in that world than I am, and I had them all send me articles that they found to be credible sources of information. And then I basically pasted all those links into OpenAI and was like, based on these links, can you tell me the top three bull cases, the top three bear cases? Like, can you give me an unbiased lay of the land of what these articles are saying? And that can help you get better, more objective information, and then you can develop your own opinions. Versus if you just read an article or if you just ask it a question and let it answer it, then you might get more biased answers and it becomes harder to develop a real opinion.
Jillian, I see you got a hand up.
Hi, yeah. Not to keep us too much in the, controversy or concerns of AI, but something that, well, first of all, I just want to say, like, I do use AI. I'm really fascinated by it. I think that it can be a great tool, but I also feel a little bit strange about using it still because we're all in a really creative field. I love creativity. It's something that I've been excited to do in my career for the rest of my life, you know? And I guess I always feel a little bit strange when I create AI art or I see that being marketed. And then there's been like controversy and stuff like that over Etsy posts selling AI art or book publishers using AI art for their covers. And so I guess just I'm just curious to know somebody as a professional in this field, where do you think the line is with AI taking over for creativity because it's cheaper, faster, smarter, all those things? And where does real human touch still come in as artists and as creatives?
Yeah, great question. And an important one. So first on the training data side, like where the AI gets the information, I think that is important. Like part of me thinks we should have ways to safeguard and say, I don't want my art to go into these models and things like that. But the other part of me is like, we all observe things all the time and take in information, and that inspires us and influences how we create things. That's nothing is original. Like there's no such thing as an original thought or an original idea. It's the first thing I learned in film school is if you want to be a good filmmaker and become a really great creative, learn how to connect dots between things that already exist, because that's the best way to come up with really thoughtful ideas. So it's a little different than just remaking Star Wars, right? But like if you're taking Star Wars and then mixing it with like some other concept, and then you come up with your own version of a story based on the influence you got from these different things, that could turn into something really special. And so I think for the most part, that's really what AI is doing when you're generating photos and videos and stuff. Like I said, even with the podcast theme I did, there was a lot of effort to generating the image and then using the image to create a video. Like I had to create this whole storyboard before I could actually turn that into a cohesive video. But I'll give you a very specific example because I think there's two different types of creative. There's like original, like artistic creative that you're building to evoke an emotion or tell a story. But then there's commercial creative, which is very different. Like if you're building talking head videos of interviews or you're doing product photography, like that's not the same thing as like creating an artistic piece of art. Like they're two totally different forms of creative. And I interviewed this guy, Rltn, who's become extremely popular for image to video generation. He's really good at it. He has all these courses on how to use Midjourney. And the reason he got into AI is he was a sales rep for a design firm in e-commerce. And so he had like 20 designers that were pumping out all of these different product mock-ups and things to go in e-commerce marketing emails. And he realized that the quality of the designs were going down, and he was really confused about it because he's like, these designers are the same designers. They've been great the whole time. Like, why is the design getting worse? And there were two reasons. One was there's too much work to do. So the designers were overwhelmed and didn't have time to do the work. So they rushed things. The second is it's really difficult to work with clients. Like you're trying to translate a vision that's in someone else's head, pass it from a sales rep to a design team, and then create it. There's a game of telephone there where information gets lost. And if a designer has to go back and make changes when they're 90% of the way done, like that's a pain in the ass. Like it's really hard to keep going back and making more and more iterations. So he came out of it as a place of, I'm doing things that are hurting my designers. How do I make it a more efficient game of telephone so that they can have a better time doing their work? So he would take as a non-designer and use AI to create mock-ups based on his conversations with the client, get client feedback from the mock-ups, iterate on it a little bit on his own, and then use a more curated mood board to bring to the design team to say, we're a lot closer to the vision in the client's head now, and it's a lot less work on the designer to then finish and get it to a complete product.
So
So
smart.
I'm a big fan of that way of thinking of like, how do we use it as a tool to streamline and make the creative process more efficient, not just like a replacement of all these designers.
Yeah, and I think that's the number one way that all the award-winning top creative agencies out there are using it right now. That's one of the ways they are absolutely creating AI generated mock-ups and prototypes and things before they go and actually kind of get the finished version to the client. I'm going to just add in here though, and y'all might be too young to remember this, but back early on, before Adobe Creative Suite was a thing, there was similar hubbub when artists started creating digital art, graphic designers, right? There was a same kind of argument. Is it really art? They don't have to know how to paint anymore, right? We've got Adobe. And today I think you would laugh at someone who is like these amazing graphic artists who are using, you know, tools for like Adobe Creative Suite or creating these pieces of art. They're absolutely art. And here's the other thing, AI has been built into those tools from day one.
And I also want to, because I know we're running out of time, I just want to
Yeah.
double down on that, is I think it opens new doors of creativity too. The same way that like painting moved to photography and then painting became something where it wasn't about portraits of families as much anymore. It became pure art. Like it became less commercial and more just creative storytelling. Painting hasn't gone away. It's just become more of a niche artistic thing instead of being a commercial thing. I think we're going to see the same thing happen with photography and video, where the new form is going to be like 3D design and game development. Like it takes a lot of effort. AI can't just spin up a full world on its own. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of creative people that are coming up with textures and lighting and building out these 3D environments. So all those people that grow up with creative thinking are just going to expand into new mediums and new formats. It's not going to be reduced to the formats that we've lived in for the last 50 years.
Yeah, exactly. Great, good questions and amazing discussion. It's 3 o'clock on the nose, so I think we should start thinking about wrapping it up. Ricky, I'll give you the last word. Anything you want, any parting words of wisdom or advice for these, for these students?
I'll leave it on this. Like community is everything, people's everything. If you're interested in learning someone's story or if you're interested in any topic, like just go around and ask people. You'll be surprised how many people give you their time. And I think it's the number one thing that's gave me a successful career. It's the reason I'm working what I work in. It's all about just interacting with people. That's never going to change, no matter how much we're engaging virtually or AI starts to become a role in society. Like it all is about human connection, people to people. I'll leave it with
Love
that.
that. Oh, such, yay. Thank you, Ricky. Big round of applause. Thank you so much for taking the time to come in. It's so valuable for the students to talk to folks working out there in industry right now, Ricky. So I'll have you in again. So stay tuned for that. And I know I'll see you on the XR AI pub crawl in a few months. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And really appreciate it. Appreciate the time.
Awesome. Yeah. And by the way, if anyone has other questions or anything, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn too. I ask for referrals and customers and things more than anyone I know. So if there's anything I can do to help, just let me know.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
You guys